So I hope that everybody can see my screen now. So thank you very much for attending today to this talk on Introduction to Medical Writing. I'm just trying to change slides. Okay. So first of all, I'd just like to introduce myself and tell you a little bit how I became a medical writer. So I started by doing a PhD in pharmacology. Then after that I did a postdoctoral research position. And then I worked in a pharmaceutical company as a preclinical research scientist for 5 years. Following this, I had a little bit of a change of career path and decided to move into clinical research, where I worked in a contract research organization, or CRO. And then after that experience, both in preclinical and clinical research, I decided to become a medical writer. And I started off as a freelancer. I did that for 7 years, working from home on my own. And then I was quite successful, and in the end I decided to start employing people. So I created my own little company called Synopsis, and I started to employ medical writers. And today there are 16 people in my company, and it's still doing well, I'm happy to say. In parallel with this, I've been very involved in the European Medical Writers Association, EMWA. Firstly, I became a member 15 years ago and attended a large number of their workshops, and this has really been the source of training that I've had. And then I became even more involved. I started to actually teach a workshop myself. I joined the education committee and eventually became vice president and then president of the association. And EMWA has been an incredible source of inspiration to me throughout my career and has provided me really with the only training that I've had. So what is medical writing? So this, just to let you know, so this seminar is going to be broken down into 3 sections. First of all, a little bit of more understanding for you about what medical writing is. Then secondly, what sort of person makes a good medical writer? And then finally, how to go about trying to find a job in medical writing and getting training in medical writing. So hopefully most of the people listening today are either people you're thinking about becoming a medical writer, or you perhaps have already been lucky enough to get a job as a medical writer, but you're probably quite new to the business and would like to know a little bit more about it. If you are a very experienced medical writer and you're listening, you're very welcome. I don't know if you're going to learn much from me because you probably know it all already, but welcome anyway. So what is medical writing? So the definition in Wikipedia is the activity of producing scientific and medical documentation by a specialized writer. The medical writer typically is not one of the scientists or doctors who performed the research. So that's the key, the second phrase, that we are writing about research that we did not perform. And that requires a set of skills which I'm going to describe later. So medical writing can be broken down into 2 main categories. The first is regulatory writing, and this involves the preparation of documents related to the pharmaceutical development process. And these documents are destined for clinical trial personnel, investigators, pharmaceutical companies, and regulatory authorities. The second type of medical writing is medical communications, and this is the preparation of documents destined for healthcare professionals, academic researchers, and patients. So you can see it's really quite different, the 2 types of writing. The first is really for the pharmaceutical industry and for the government bodies who are responsible for approving and controlling new medications and medications already on the market in their countries. And the second type of writing is destined for doctors, nurses, researchers and patients. So that's two different types of documents with different skill sets really to write those two types of documents. Sometimes having a bit of trouble changing slide for some reason. Okay. So where do medical writers fit in the pharmaceutical development process? So the first thing that happens when a pharmaceutical company is trying to invent a new drug is the chemistry. That is that they invent lots of different molecules to try to decide which is the best one. And medical writers don't usually write much about chemistry. If we do have to write anything, it's just a copy and paste. We're not expected to know much about chemistry. So I can reassure you on that point. Then the next stage of the development is the pharmaceutical formulation. So that's where the pharmaceutical company tries to decide, is it better for the drug to be a tablet or a syrup or an injection? And medical writers will probably write a little bit about that in some of the documents, but again, it's not our main area of expertise. So other people will provide us with the text and we'll probably just copy and paste it. Preclinical research, so this is all the research that's done in animals before testing in humans. And we will start to write a bit more about this in some of our documents. But again, it's not really called medical writing. At this point, it's scientific writing. But medical writers will overlap to some extent with this. So some medical writers will write about preclinical research, but not all of us. But I would say that all medical writers do write about clinical research. So clinical research is when the drug is tested in humans, and it can be broken down into 4 phases. The phase in healthy volunteers, then phase 2, which is the first studies that are performed in patients to check whether the drug seems to work. And then phase 3 is large studies that are performed in many patients in order to really test the efficacy and safety of the product. And then, assuming that everything was good in terms of efficacy and safety, the drug will receive a marketing authorization and be sold in the different countries. But then there's still another phase of clinical research, which is phase 4, which is clinical trials that are performed post-marketing. And medical writers will mostly concentrate on writing about those 4 phases of clinical research. So now I'm going to tell you about the different documents that medical writers write. Before and during clinical trials, after a clinical trial, and after the marketing of the product. So first of all, before and during a clinical trial, the first document that springs to mind for me is the clinical study protocol. So this is like a recipe or an instruction book that tells the doctors and the nurses who are responsible for performing a clinical trial, it tells them how to perform that trial. And you might have 50 different investigator centers throughout the world involved in a clinical trial, and all of them have to perform the study in exactly the same way. If everybody does it a little bit differently, the data won't mean anything at the end. So the way to ensure that every center performs the trial in exactly the same way is to have a very well-written clinical study protocol, which is extremely clear and doesn't contain any errors or source of confusion. And this is where the medical writer's role is really important, because the clinical project manager will know how they want their study to be performed. The medical director will know what sort of patients they want to see in the study, and what dose of the drug they should receive and how often they should receive it, and what assessments should be performed. The statistician will know how the data should be analysed, but all these people are perhaps not very good at writing things very clearly and making sure that the doctors actually understand how to perform the clinical trial. And this is where the medical writer's role is really essential, because that's what we're good at. So we communicate with all of those other people that I've just mentioned and manage to obtain that information from them and create a very clear and well-written document. That is the protocol. Another document that we write in parallel with the protocol is the patient-informed consent form. This is a document that is a bit different than the protocol, because instead of being read by doctors and nurses, it's going to be read by patients. So that means it has to be written in a very different sort of language. Often the patients may be elderly, they may have mental illness, they could be children or parents of children in different levels of education, different severity of illness. So you can imagine a patient lying in their bed who's very ill in hospital needs to have a document that they can read that's very clear and written in the sort of language that they can understand. But at the same time, this is a legally required document, so it must contain all of the information needed so that the patient can read it and understand what is going to happen to them if they agree to perform this clinical trial, what risks there will be undergoing, and what will be the advantages for them for performing in this trial. And the patient has to actually sign this informed consent form to say, yes, I do agree to perform the study. So medical writers are responsible for writing this document, and this document and the clinical study protocol are sent to the ethics committee, who have to decide whether or not they consider this study to be ethical. So they're very, very important documents that we're involved in writing. Another document written at the same time is the investigator's brochure. This is like an encyclopedia telling you everything you ever wanted to know about a particular drug, and it tells you the chemistry, the preclinical information and the clinical data that's already known about a particular product. So this can be a very long, sometimes 200-page document that the investigator has on their desk, and if during a clinical trial there's a problem, patient has a side effect, he can use this as a reference and quickly look in it and find out, is this a side effect that's happened before, what's known about it, and what should I do? And medical writers are involved in writing this document too. Another document we write is patient narratives. So patient narratives are like a little medical history of a particular patient, and they're usually 1 to 2 pages long, and they have to be written for all patients who experience a serious adverse event during a clinical trial. And a serious adverse event is anything that is life-threatening, involves hospitalization, obviously death, involves surgery, and so it could even be that a patient is run over by a bus. Obviously this has probably nothing to do with the drug that they were taking in the study, but we still have to write a description of what happened to that patient, their medical history, the outcome, how they were treated, etc. So that's another sort of document that we write. Another one is the investigational medicinal product dossier, which is a request to the regulatory authorities to be allowed to perform a new clinical trial, and this has to be submitted every time a pharmaceutical company would like to perform a trial. And the pediatric investigation plan, this is quite a new document that the regulatory authorities have decided is necessary now for each new drug that's going to be tested, where a pharmaceutical company has to describe the efforts that they will make to test this drug in children. The reason is that in the past, pharmaceutical companies didn't really test drugs in children because they were scared of side effects and problems. But the regulatory authorities realized that there weren't enough drugs on the market for children, and that really it was necessary to test drugs in children in order to be able to offer more medication options to children. So this is now a requirement for us to write this document as well. Okay, so after a clinical trial, there are lots more documents to write. The first and most important one is the clinical study report. So this describes the methodology and the results of each clinical study. There's a separate report written for each study, and it gives a clinical interpretation of the results of that study. And this is probably the most common document that regulatory medical writers write, along with the protocol. Then after that, once lots of clinical trials have been performed on a particular drug, we need to write something called the Common Technical Document, or CTD, and this is a big summary of all of the research development that's been performed on a product. And you might get to the stage where 20 or 30 clinical trials have been performed on a drug, and this document summarizes the results of all of those trials. And medical writers are most commonly involved in writing what's called the clinical modules, which is module 2.5 and 2.7. There are other modules which are called the preclinical modules, and some medical writers might also be involved in writing them. But I think there are fewer of us who have experience in that. Another document is the risk management plan, which you can guess what that's about. Basically, the company has to describe what are the risks to the patient of taking a particular product, and has to describe all of the efforts that they are planning to make to ensure that that risk is minimized and constantly followed up, and reporting of any safety issues is done rapidly and efficiently. Then after approval and marketing of a product, there are even more documents to write. Pharmacovigilance is the activity that involves following up the safety of a product once it's actually on the market. And to report those safety findings, there are two documents in particular that we have to write, the DSUR and the PSUR. And then we start to write clinical study protocols for the post-marketing studies, that's the phase 4 studies, and then the cycle starts again, because once we write a protocol, we have to write an investigator's brochure, an informed consent form, etc., etc. So the good news is that you can see there are a lot of documents to be written in the regulatory field, and therefore medical writers are very important and are kept very busy. So what about medical communications? This is the other area of medical writing that I mentioned. So you might well be more experienced with this if you're not actually a medical writer right now. Perhaps you're a PhD student, or perhaps a postdoc research scientist, and you have probably written quite a few of these documents already in your career. And that's good news, because that means you're already a medical writer in some ways, and if you apply for a job as a medical writer, you'll be able to talk about your experience in these areas, and that will help you. So the most common medical communication document, I'd say, is the manuscript or publication or article in a scientific journal. Also literature reviews, which summarize the findings of lots of manuscripts. Also conference abstracts, posters and conference reports, slide presentations. So those are probably the documents you will have had experience with already if you're a research scientist. Medical communications writers also sometimes write websites. There are more and more websites now describing medical issues, and we can help with them. Product monographs and brochures, these are the documents that are prepared by pharmaceutical companies in order to explain to doctors about their products and to convince them to prescribe them to their patients. And it's the sales representatives who take these documents to the doctors and show them to them. Educational tools, so these can be documents destined for doctors and nurses to help them understand better how to treat certain types of patients or how to use a particular medication. Or they can be educational tools aimed to patients themselves. For example, for diabetic patients, how to look after themselves, what they should eat, what they shouldn't, etc. On top of all of those documents, there are some other related activities that medical writers often get involved in. Firstly, medical translations into your native language, editing and proofreading, quality control and training. So quite a lot of medical writers that I know are involved in some of these areas. Of course, there are also people who are specialized in those areas. For example, medical translations, there are very highly specialized people, medical translators, who have been to university specifically to learn how to do that. But as medical writers, we're quite often asked to help with that sort of thing as well. Okay, so I've told you quite a lot about what medical writing is and what sort of documents we write. Now I'm going to talk to you a little bit about who medical writers are, where do they work, and what sort of qualities and skills do they have. So first of all, where do we work? Well, of course, pharmaceutical companies quite often have large medical writing departments. Also, contract research organizations. These are the companies that are paid by pharmaceutical companies to run clinical trials on their behalf, and they often employ medical writers. Medical communications agencies, these are companies specialized in that whole area of medical communications that I just explained to you, and their clients are pharmaceutical companies in general. Publishing houses, these are the companies that own the medical journals and publish journals and books. Specialized medical writing companies, such as my own company, most of our clients are pharmaceutical companies as well, and a few of our clients are CROs or actual doctors and research scientists. Medical writers also work in universities. Some large research groups have realized the advantages of employing one person whose job is to do medical writing for them. Then that way they're able to publish as many publications as possible per year, and to be sure that their publications are more likely to be accepted by the journal because they have a really professional person writing them. Also, not-for-profit organizations and charities sometimes employ medical writers. Plus, there's a large body of freelance medical writers who work for themselves. I think EMWA, the last time I heard, approximately 20% of our members were freelancers, and we have about 1,200 members, so you can see that represents a lot of freelance medical writers in Europe. So, if you're thinking about becoming a medical writer, I'm going to tell you now a little bit my opinion on what sort of experience and qualifications could be useful to you, and what sort of personality traits and qualities would be useful in order for you to be a successful medical writer. So this is obviously my own personal opinion, and some people might have a slightly different one, which is fine. But I do run a company in which I have employed quite a substantial number of medical writers, and over the years have been able to see what sort of people have become good writers and what sort of people struggled and weren't quite as good. So that's how I've prepared this list, thanks to my experience with employing people and training them. So I do believe that it's very important to have a scientific qualification. I know there are some medical writers who do not have scientific qualifications who are linguists, and I'm very happy for them that they're successful, but I personally will only employ people with a scientific qualification, and I think a lot of companies feel the same these days. So for me that would be a medical doctor or a PhD or a master's degree or a pharmacist. A bachelor's of science is possible, but the competition is great, and so usually now I only really employ MDs, PhDs and pharmacists because we have so many applicants. So if you've done a bachelor's degree and you're wondering if it's worth doing a PhD before you become a medical writer, my answer is yes. I think it's very helpful on your CV, but also the actual experience of research and writing your thesis and publications is very useful and will help you in your attempt to become a medical writer. So obviously writing experience is also very, very helpful in a job application. Obviously if you've actually done some medical writing, that's fantastic and that gives you a lot more chance. But otherwise, if you've written scientific publications or conference abstracts, posters and slides, then that also looks very good on your job application and you should list them all. If you've written a thesis, then you know that is a big job, and we know how hardworking and dedicated you have to be to succeed that, so that already shows a level of determination and also that you're meticulous. Laboratory reports are also, of course, important documents that quite a lot of research scientists have experience with. Perhaps you've had experience at writing for a website or for a blog, or perhaps for your university journal or magazine. This is also very useful, and quite often people who want to become medical writers are people who have had a love of reading and writing all their lives and were involved in their school journal or university journal, and I think that sort of thing for me is impressive and shows that someone, it's really in your blood, it's really something you've always wanted to do. I've also written here that work experience in an English-speaking country is helpful. Obviously if you're native English, that's not a requirement, but in my company, which is based in France, I have employed mostly native English people, but I did employ 3 medical writers who are not English, 2 are French, but they have both lived in English-speaking countries for more than 5 years. And one is Italian, and that's the same, she lived in America for 10 years. And for me this is quite important because the level of English is absolutely essential for my company, because all of the medical writing that we do is in English. Obviously if you're applying for a job to do medical writing in Spanish, then that's a completely different matter. But a lot of jobs for medical writers, whichever country they're in, most of the writing that you're going to be doing will be in English. So I do believe that you need to have excellent written English if you're going to be writing in English, obviously. And that means perfect grammar, spelling and punctuation. You must be someone who has meticulous attention to detail, and also someone who can write short, clear sentences. Here in France, the French, they write in a very poetic sort of way, and when they try to write English, they find it difficult to make their sentences short and clear. And quite often I will take a sentence written by a French person and I'll cut it into 2 or even 3 sentences. For me, a sentence should not say more than one thing. And this is important, and if you're someone who really loves language and loves making things very clear, then you might well be a good medical writer. You have to have an ability to build a logical argument. You have to be able to convince people using the written word of what you want to tell them. Also, you have to be able to organize complex information. And there are different ways of doing this, but one is using headings and subheadings, bullet points, numbering, perhaps tables and figures. So you have to be someone who wants to take complex information and make it into something simple for other people, who takes pride and pleasure in the idea of helping people understand. You also have to be someone who's very respectful of guidelines, templates and instructions, because in medical writing there are a lot of rules and a lot of guidelines to follow, templates to follow and instructions, and we have to follow those, otherwise our clients or even the regulatory authorities won't be happy. So we mustn't be too proud, and we must be willing to do things the way we're told. But of course within a guideline it still allows for you to find the best possible way to present the information, but using the structure that the guideline asks you to respect. So I do really believe that a medical writer must have a scientific mind, and that's why I think it's important to have a scientific qualification, because that helps you to develop that scientific mind. You have to be able to understand complex science in any field. In my company, the staff will work on 10 or 15 different projects during a year. So they may work on oncology this month, cardiovascular next month, neurology the month after. And each time they have to be able to read the documents that they're provided by the client and quickly understand it and get into the topic and start to be able to write intelligent documents very quickly. So you do need to be pretty clever, and I think that that's also why I like to employ people with PhDs, because they've proved that they've been able to get to that level in their education, which is a good sign already. I said before, you have to be able to explain ideas in a clear, logical manner, and you have to be good at working out how to present data in the most appropriate way. Sometimes a table is better, sometimes a graph, sometimes text. You have to be able to take large volumes of information and to summarize them into simple, clear text. Sometimes for a clinical study report we can have more than 1,000 tables, and we have to work out what to actually say about those 1,000 tables, and you can't describe every single one because you wouldn't have enough room. So you have to be able to work out what's the most important information from those tables and how to describe that in text in a way that someone else can go away really understanding what happened in that trial without having to look at the 1,000 tables. You have to be able to distinguish good science from bad science and recognize when data are biased. And you need to be somebody who respects ethical principles and will only write the truth. It could happen one day that a client suggested to you that you should write something slightly different to what you see in the data. Stories like that come out occasionally in the newspapers, and even occasionally people go to prison. So we don't want to have a bad reputation and be involved in anything that isn't 100% ethical. And EMWA actually has guidelines regarding that supports their medical writers in order, and I sometimes say to my clients, I belong to EMWA and I have to follow the EMWA ethical guidelines. I can't write what you're asking me to write. and I usually find that by using EMWA as a support, they accept that without any problem. So I rather like this quote from Einstein, which says, if you can't explain it to a 6-year-old, you don't understand it yourself. I think that's clear, and I agree with that. Whether the 6-year-old can understand it is another matter. Whether you can get them to stop looking at their iPad for long enough to listen to you is another matter. So, more personal qualities: meticulous attention to detail, total respect of timelines and deadlines. Yes, I do have to admit, rather disappointingly, it can be a bit of a stressful job. We're working in a business where time is money. Pharmaceutical companies make millions of dollars every day when they're selling a product, and they don't make any money when they're not selling it. So we are under a lot of pressure, and if somebody tells you this document has to be ready by Friday at 5 p.m, you cannot give it at Friday at 6 p.m. It's that strict. So you do have to be someone who really respects that and is able to work in a very efficient manner. You need to be well organized. Most medical writers have very tidy desks because we are very organized people and we have a logical way of thinking and working. You need to take great pride in your work whilst remaining modest. And you have to be able to accept criticism and comment and remain polite and respectful at all times. You have to know that you're not the final author of the documents that you're writing. If you write a manuscript, you're actually writing it for other people who will be named as authors, and you will only be acknowledged for having helped. So those people will have strong opinions about what should be written in the document, and they may write in red pen all over your document and tell you they want you to change, you need to change it. And you mustn't be too proud. You mustn't be someone who bursts into tears every time someone tells you there's something wrong with your work, because it's going to happen most days of the week. But you get used to it, and you have to see it as something positive, because all these people are authors, and it's good that they're motivated and interested in what you're doing and helping you. So you have to be good at working in a team. And you need to have a bit of a project manager type personality, because you need to coordinate other team members' activities, in particular reviewing of your documents. You need to be patient and determined and able to see a project through to the end. Okay, so that was a description of my opinion of the best sort of person to be a medical writer, and if you recognize yourself in those, then that's great. And if you've already found a job as a medical writer, that's fantastic. And if you haven't yet looked for a job, or you haven't found one yet, then now I have a few slides to give you a little bit of help and advice. So first of all, prepare your CV and application email and letter in perfect English if you're applying for a job in which the medical writing will be performed in English. Make sure there are no errors whatsoever in the English, and if you're not native English, or even if you are, to be honest, I would recommend you ask a friend to read it for you, just to make sure, because it's so easy to make a mistake. Make sure you use a formal language style, even in an email. Remember, it's a job application, and it's your opportunity to demonstrate your excellent writing skills. Make your letter quite long and tell the reader everything about the sort of writing that you've already done and why you like writing so much and why you want the job. This is your opportunity to show the person who's recruiting how good you are at writing. So use that opportunity. Don't write a 3-line email. Write a 30-line email. Use the space to actually sell yourself. People don't only look at CVs, they like to read a letter. And I've often read a letter and said, wow, that's a great letter, I'm almost sure I'm going to employ this person. And then everything else has gone well, and I have employed them, but I've already been able to tell just from the letter. Make sure you highlight your writing experience and skills in that letter and list any publications that you've authored in your CV. So you can find job adverts on the EMWA website, on LinkedIn, various other places. You can also send spontaneous applications to pharmaceutical companies and all the other types of organisations that I mentioned earlier. If you receive an application form, again, make sure you complete it in perfect English and have it checked, because even just the application form, we read it very, very carefully before we decide whether to give someone a medical writing test. So I think most job applications for a medical writer will involve performing a test of some sort, and these vary enormously from different companies. Some will be a 2-hour test which you receive by email, and others might be a 2-day test or even a 1-week test. And other tests you actually have to go to the premises of the company and actually perform it. And if your medical writing is going to be in English in your job, then the test will be in English. And your interview might well be in English as well. So I do hope that you get a job and that gives you a little bit of help. Here's a slide about EMWA, because EMWA is really very, very useful for training and networking, in my opinion, and has been an enormous help to me over my 15-year career. So the membership is €130 a year in Europe and $145 a year outside Europe. And for that you get access to the members-only website of members-only section of the website, and you receive the quarterly journal, Medical Writing, which is an excellent journal which contains a lot of very useful information and articles about medical writing, and I highly recommend it. On top of that, but which you have to pay separately for, of course, we have 2 conferences per year, one in May and one in November, and during those conferences we have a whole host of workshops on offer. These are half-day workshops which offer training opportunities on many, many topics to do with medical writing. And a lot of those workshops entitle you to obtain certificates in medical writing, the foundation and the advanced certificate, and these are very good for your CV and are more and more respected in the pharmaceutical industry as proof that you have received training in medical writing. And of course networking opportunities are fantastic in EMWA. When you come to the conferences, you'll meet a lot of people like yourself, new medical writers, more experienced writers who are willing to share their knowledge, and that's fantastic. There is other training available. There's a company called Management Forum which offers a 3-day course, Introduction to Medical Writing, which is very helpful. There's the DIA, the American Medical Writers Association, which is similar to EMWA, but the conferences are held in America. And quite recently there's a Masters in Medical Writing, which is now available in the University of Innsbruck in Austria. And a lot of the modules are presented by senior members of EMWA. So, just to sum up, why do I love medical writing? Well, I find it very rewarding and satisfying. It's a growing profession. I showed you all the documents that we need to write, and this list is growing every year. There are more and more medical writers every year, but there's also more and more work for us. What's great is we get to use our scientific education and skills, and at the same time we're constantly learning and keeping up with the latest science. It's a very flexible job. You can live anywhere, and many jobs these days allow you to be home-based. And EMWA is a great organisation. and in general I find medical writers to be very friendly people. So good luck with that, and now I'd be very happy if people would like to ask questions. I think that Gavin is going to put them on the chat panel for me, and I'm going to be able to answer.
Yes, I'll try and do that. Helen, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Okay, I will try and do that. Thank you very much for the presentation. In fact, we start with a quick question. Actually, one person asked what MS Office skills are required for medical writing, Word, PowerPoint, etc.
Right, yes, that's a good question. Well, I think Word is the most important, and you will find as a medical writer that you do develop skills in Word that you probably didn't know how to do before, because we work on very large documents. So we do learn how to do things like tables of contents and all sorts of skills that we didn't have before. But you will receive training in that as a medical writer. It's important for us to train our staff. Word's the most important, and PowerPoint as well if you're preparing slide presentations. But again, I don't really expect new medical writers to have a lot of experience in that. I more expect to have to train them. Okay, I see there's a...
I just sent you a question, yes, from Laura.
Okay. Is there enough work for medical writers not writing in English? So I don't know so much about that, I have to admit. But I think that within each country there must be plenty of work for medical writers not writing in English. Already you have local journals, local medical journals which publish in the local languages. Plus all of the documents that need to be written for patients are of course in the local language, and even some of the documents written for doctors and nurses as well. So I have to admit that I don't have a great deal of experience, but it seems likely to me that within each country there must be quite a lot of medical writing in the local language. Okay, so I'm just waiting.
Okay, there's plenty of questions.
Okay.
I think along the same sort of line as the last one. Send it to you. Again from Laura.
Okay. The question panel is very difficult.
Okay.
I don't know if there's a way to make it bigger. It's minuscule. I can't really see the questions properly. Is there a way to expand the question panel? It's so small. Ah, yes, okay, I've managed it. I've managed it. Okay.
No, I've lost it.
So, if my company was asked to write a document in, say, French, would I prefer to hire a French medical writer, or would I prefer to produce it in English and then hire a translator? Okay, well, yes, we are asked to write a certain number of documents in French, and we do have 2 native French writers, and we prefer to give those projects to those 2 in general. I think the only advantage of doing it in English and then translating it would be if the document was required in both languages, and that can happen, that the client wants us to produce the document in 2 languages, in which case we would write it in English and then pay to have it translated. But otherwise, if it's only requested in French, then we would only write it in French to start with.
Okay. Then we have 2 questions, I'll say, a bit more related to how to get a job in a particular situation.
Mm-hmm. Okay. How to get a medical communications writer's job in a non-English speaking country like Germany. The background of the person asking this question is he or she has a PhD in pharmacology, research scientist for 4 years, and has also been a publication writer for 2 years. And he's from an English-speaking country, but he's asking how to get a medcoms job in Germany or another non-English-speaking country. Well, I think that everything I said was valid, apart from when I said you needed to be good at English. If you're going to be writing in German, then obviously everything I said was true, except that you need to be good at writing in German. But apart from that, all of the information I gave about how to apply for a job and what sort of qualities you needed to have are obviously still exactly the same. So I'm not sure if there's anything more that I could tell you. I mean, I think obviously if they're looking for someone to write in German and they have a choice of German people versus someone who's not German, they're probably going to take the German person. Just like I will more likely employ a native English person than I will a French person. But, you know, you just have to try to sell yourself and convince them that you're the right person for the job. Good luck.
Again, the next question is on the same, along the same line. The person has experience but doesn't have, let's say, doesn't seem to have UK experience, just moved to London. And any advice on how to get a job, say, without this UK experience?
Okay. Well, the fact you're living in London is probably good, because I think it's one of the centres of medical writing in the world. Even more would be if you would like to move to Manchester in the north of England. There seem to be about 10 or 20 medical communications agencies in the north of England around Manchester. But even in London you have a lot of pharmaceutical companies and a lot of medical communications agencies, so I think you stand a good chance of getting a job there. Apart from that, I think the advice I gave before is the same.
I think I just deleted something.
Technical.
We have another question. Is a medical degree alongside an honours degree beneficial?
A medical degree is fantastic. There aren't that many actual medics who are medical writers, actual medical doctors. And if you are a medical doctor, I think you stand a far higher chance of getting a job as a medical writer. I mean, I know we don't have a medical doctor in our company, and quite often clients find that disappointing. And I think we would have more success if we were able to employ a medical doctor. So, yes, it's very useful.
Okay. We have another question. Is it possible to find internships in medical writing?
That's a good question. Yes, we do receive requests from people sometimes offering to come and do internships and even work for free in the company for a few months in order to learn the job. I have to admit that we've never accepted that for the moment, because we've always been too busy to feel that we had the time to look after someone. But it is something I'm considering for the future. Particularly perhaps the person could be very helpful with quality control. I didn't really explain what quality control was, but it involves rereading the documents written by medical writers and making sure that there are absolutely no errors, and even checking every single number that's quoted in the text and comparing it with every single number in the statistical tables. So it's a bit of a boring job, but it's very, very important. And I think that a trainee medical writer could be very useful at helping with that sort of job, and at the same time it would give them amazing training because they would have the opportunity to read a lot of documents written by medical writers. But it's difficult for us to employ someone who's actually going to do medical writing in our company, but only for a few months, because our clients wouldn't really appreciate that. They want to know who's their writer, they want to see their CV, and they don't want to hear that they have an intern. But I think perhaps in a pharmaceutical company it could be feasible. The problem with my company is that it's a service company, so clients want to have the best writer possible. But in a pharmaceutical company, I think they might be willing. All I can do is say that it is a good idea, and to send your CV and to propose yourself, and hope that a company will agree.
Okay, we have another question. If you have all the needed qualifications, what else can you do to boost your CV?
I think coming to an EMWA conference, and I'm not just saying that because I'm trying to encourage people to join EMWA, but I have employed people who had good CVs and who have made the effort to actually start to get training in medical writing by coming to an EMWA conference, and I found that impressive. And the other thing is perhaps help people start doing some medical writing, even if it's for free. Ask scientists that you know, research scientists, if you can help them rewriting, editing their documents, or even literally writing them for them. Maybe they'll pay you a little bit. I think obviously the best thing is to get a job and to have a salary, but if you can start doing a little bit of work freelance, then that would be fantastic, because you start to have a better looking CV. So that would be my advice, is to try and do some medical writing and to get some training.
Okay, I'm just sending you the next question.
Okay, does EMWA have updated guidelines on the ethical use of medical writers in academic settings, non-drug related research? No. We need them. No, EMWA has guidelines on writing manuscripts, and mainly on making sure that we're not ghostwriters. So ghostwriter is a person who has written a document in secret, if you like, and is not acknowledged. And EMWA feels strongly that this is unethical, so we have guidelines about that. But guidelines on the ethical use of medical writing in academic settings, I guess it is that, in a way, it's the same thing. Any document that you're involved in helping to write, you should be acknowledged. It's unlikely that you will be an author unless the head of the lab is very, very generous, but you should be acknowledged, and that's very important. And if you're not acknowledged, then it's against the guidelines, and you can show those guidelines to your boss and say, look, this needs to change.
Okay, we have a similar question. Are there associations similar to EMWA for chemical writing?
For chemical writing?
Yes, chemical writing.
Probably, but I don't know. I expect there are, and it's quite different. I would not feel that I was able to write anything about chemistry, but obviously if you have chemistry qualifications, then that would be fantastic if you could write for chemists, and I guess you need to search on the internet and try to find out the answer to that, because I'm afraid I don't know. Sorry.
Okay, we have some freelancer questions. Just sending you one.
Okay. It's a bit, the sound is difficult because I have a very bad echo of my own voice. I don't know if there's anything, Gavin, that you can do about that. While I was presenting, you managed to stop that, I think.
That's probably because my sound is now on. You can hear. Okay.
Yeah. Let's try. Oh yes, that's much, much better. I think it was an echo between me and Gavin. Okay, so there's a question from Fiona. It says, I'm a freelance medical translator. In your experience, is it feasible to build up a base of direct clients, or is documentation dealt with more by agencies? Okay, so medical translations is different to my experience. It's true we do a little bit of translation, but not much. Nearly everything that we do is medical writing, so really all I can do is answer for myself, and that is to say that we mostly work directly for clients, for pharmaceutical companies, and in general we try to avoid passing via agencies because first of all, obviously they want to take a cut of the money, so they usually want us to charge less. And secondly, we find the agencies are often a little bit piggy in the middle, and they get in the way of communication between us and the actual client. And we sometimes find that we don't have the information that we need, and the agency is blocking us, maybe not meaning to, but that's what happens. But I do believe that in medical translations it's quite a different story, and the translations agencies are very important in the industry and do supply a great deal of the work. But I can really only answer on behalf of an actual medical writing company, I'm afraid. Okay, here's another question from Marion. Do freelancers work with VAT, or can they work with droit d'auteur régime? So this is a French question here. I think you have, it depends which country you're in, but here in France I think you have a choice of whether you are registered for VAT or not, and it's basically dependent on how much you earn per year. So once you earn over a certain level, then you have to be VAT declared. In terms of droit d'auteur régime, which is author's rights, I'm afraid I don't know about that. It's not something that I have come across. Okay, so I'm waiting for another question.
I just sent you another question, Helen.
Okay, that's strange. I don't see it. Ah, okay, it's at the top now instead of at the bottom. Okay, so here's a question from Owen. Would you have any advice for someone with experience in medical communications getting into regulatory writing? As a current freelancer, it seems that it's somewhat difficult to get a foot in the door without prior experience in regulatory writing. Yes, that's a good question, and I think it's completely true. I think it's easier to get into medical communications after having done a PhD and a postdoc, for example, The medical communications agencies are relatively not easy to get into, but they will employ people because they've already written manuscripts and posters and that sort of thing during their research career. But to get into regulatory writing is more difficult because it's difficult to get any experience unless you already have the job. Yes, and I have to admit that even well, in my company we do employ people with no experience. So there are small companies like mine who are willing to employ regulatory writers who have no experience. But for example, when I advertise a job as a senior medical writer, I am always looking for someone with at least 3 years experience in regulatory writing and not manuscript writing. So it isn't easy, I have to admit. I'm not really sure how to advise you. Again, perhaps if you can afford it, going to EMWA and getting training in regulatory writing could help to impress a potential employer. Or otherwise applying for jobs in companies like mine. I know there are other companies, small medical writing companies such as Trilogy in Germany. They do employ people who don't have experience already. But you are right, Owen, that it's harder to get into regulatory writing. Another route some people take is the route I took, which is to actually be involved in clinical research first. So, for example, to be a CRA, Clinical Research Associate, where you actually go and you visit the doctors and you check the data of the clinical trial, and then maybe to move on to being a project manager, which was what I did. That's also a good way of moving into the regulatory field, so a sort of sideways move from the clinical research side into the writing side. And that's actually the way a lot of people have got into regulatory writing. Okay, so there's another question here from Jenny. She says, I have a bachelor's degree in English literature and an MSc in clinical trials, but no science background. Is there any training you could recommend that would prepare me for a medical writing position? Well, for me, an MSc in clinical trials, that is a science background. I'm perfectly happy with that. For me, the fact that you've done an MSc in clinical trials is excellent, and I would consider you. Voilà, that's a positive answer. Okay, I'm just looking to see if there are any other questions yet. Okay, so there's a long question here from Hamza. I'm going to read it. It says, hello, I'm an overseas qualified pharmacist with a master's degree in pharmaceutical sciences, comparable to British standards according to NARIC. I worked as a product manager in pharma companies with 5 years experience in writing medical materials directed at doctors and patients. I moved to London and I'm seeking to start a career in medical writing here. Yet there's always the hurdle of not having agency experience, UK experience. Any advice on how to overcome this obstacle? Well, your CV sounds fantastic to me. Qualified pharmacist with a master's degree in pharmaceutical sciences and having 5 years of experience of writing medical materials. I think you sound great. You have a great CV, and I think you stand a lot of chance to get a job. And I would definitely be interested in a CV like that. I have to specify that right now we don't have any jobs. We employed 3 medical writers at the beginning of September, and at the moment I'm afraid we don't have any jobs available, so please don't get too excited when I say I would employ you. But certainly a CV like that looks very good. Okay, I'm looking to see if there are any more questions. The questions are a bit strange because it doesn't put them in the logical order of when they were received. It puts them in alphabetical order. Okay, here's another question from Claudia. I'm from Argentina. I have 30 years of experience as a medical translator and interpreter. I've been working at 3 leading hospitals in Argentina for the last 15 years as an interpreter both in Argentina and abroad. I have a postgraduate certificate in translation from City University London. How can I contact potential clients abroad? Okay, so I guess this is really a question about medical translations rather than medical writing, if I understand correctly, because you're a very experienced translator and interpreter. So again, I'm not really necessarily the right person to answer a question about translators. But it certainly sounds like you have a great CV. And how can you contact potential clients abroad? I don't know, but you could produce a nice email with a summary of your experience. And I use LinkedIn a lot to look for potential clients, and I try to get them either to become my friend on LinkedIn, and then I write to them and ask them if they'd like to give me their email address, or I try to guess what their email address is based on the company they work for, and I keep sending the CV until it works. I keep sending the email until it works. But yeah, I'm not sure that I can really give you a better answer than that.
Helen, Claudia's just added something else.
Okay, yes.
What you were saying.
Thank you. So Claudia has now said, I also have experience in medical writing since I collaborate in the drafting of papers, style, wording, etc. More than 100 papers published in journals in the USA. Well, it sounds like you have loads of amazing experience, Claudia, and I think you just need to produce a really great email and send it to as many people as you can. If you're looking for potential clients abroad, you just need to find them via LinkedIn, for example, and it sounds like you're someone who people would be interested in. So
she says thank you.
You're welcome.
I sent you another question about medical writers, if they prefer employees or freelancers. I don't know if you saw that.
Oh yes. Okay. Which do pharmaceutical companies prefer, medical writers as employees or freelancers? Good question. Or companies like mine who have, you know, we're neither employees of the company nor are we freelancers, because we're a group of medical writers. We have 11 medical writers. Well, that's a difficult question to answer. I think it depends. I know that some companies like Novartis, for example, who's one of the largest pharmaceutical companies in the world, don't like to use subcontractors. They prefer to employ people. And so it's very difficult for us to get any work from them. On the other hand, there are other companies, they want to keep their head count down, so they don't want to employ people, and in fact have made redundant large numbers of employees, and then they want to use freelancers or companies like mine. So we can't give a single answer to that. It depends. It varies on the company and it varies on the financial climate. I think what happened was, because of the financial crisis, a lot of companies have made a lot of people redundant, and then all of a sudden they've discovered that they don't have enough staff. So now there is actually more work for freelancers and for small companies like mine. And then what might happen is when the financial crisis finally finishes, perhaps the companies will decide they want to start employing people again, and then there will be less work for freelancers and more for employees. So I think it depends on the company and it depends on the financial climate.
We have a similar
There's
sort
a
of
question here from
how to
yes.
become a freelancer.
Yes, from another question from Hamza, who says, if you want to start as a freelancer, whom should you approach? I don't know, your wife? See if she's willing for you to take the risk to perhaps earn lots of money and perhaps not earn so much money. Apart from that, well, you need to approach potential clients, so it all depends who you think would be good potential clients for you. You know, it's a very difficult question to answer. When I became freelance, I was lucky because I was working in the pharmaceutical industry and I was made redundant, and I was surrounded by ex-colleagues who got jobs in different companies. So I contacted those people, and I think that that's the way a lot of people manage it, is that they use their contacts. So first you use all your friends and friends of friends and people who've gone into different companies, and you see if you can do some work for them. And then once you've had a little bit of experience, your CV starts to look a bit better, then you can contact other people who you don't know. But it works slowly like that, and little by little you can move out of your circle of people you know. When I first started, I mostly worked for people I knew for about three years. But I did send my CV. I wrote a nice CV and a little sort of summary letter about myself, and I sent it out to all the pharmaceutical companies in France. You know, I just looked in the yellow pages and sent it to all of them. And sometimes I was contacted 3 or 4 years later by a company completely out of the blue, and they would say, oh yes, we received your CV, oh when was it, oh 1997, oh yes, we put it in a drawer because it looked interesting but we didn't need anyone then, and now we do need someone, so we're calling you. And I think that's the way it works in medical writing, is that it can be quite a slow process, and you need to do plenty of marketing and try to get your name known by as many people as possible, but you can't expect to get work instantly from any of those new contacts. You know, you're not selling baguettes, you're selling, you know, writing a clinical study report, you know, you're going to be charging tens of thousands of euros, and so it's a big investment for companies, and they want to feel that they trust the people they're working with, and, you know, it's a big decision for them to decide to start working with someone new. So it's a big investment of time to try to build up relationships with potential clients and little by little gain their confidence. So I guess you need to approach as many people as you can and try and think who would be good potential clients for me. Like at the moment, I've got an idea in my mind that good potential clients for my company are French biotech companies. I decided that because the large pharmaceutical companies these days seem to all be choosing preferred providers, which means they don't want to work with us because we're not on their list of preferred subcontractors, and this is very frustrating. So I thought what we need is to work for small companies like startup companies and biotech, because they haven't yet chosen preferred providers. They're still completely open to who they would be willing to work with, and they haven't got a medical writer yet. So now's the time to get in and tell them who we are, go and visit them, give a presentation, try and convince them that we're good and to give us a project. and who knows, they might grow and become a really big pharmaceutical company. So if we're in there at the beginning with them, then we can be their partner throughout. So, you know, you have to have a little bit of thinking about your strategy and what sort of companies you want to contact, what sort of companies you most like to work for. And they're the ones you should approach.
Okay, thank you, Helen. I think we'll just say that we won't accept any more questions. We still have a few more to answer. I think otherwise I think we'll be here for forever because there are a lot of questions. I just sent you another one. How much on average do medical writers earn per hour?
Okay, I'm just looking for that one. Okay, that's from Marion. Well, there is an article about that in our journal, Medical Writing. I think some surveys have been performed into that. One was performed into freelance medical writers and approximately how much do they manage to earn, and another one into employed medical writers and how much do they earn. And I'm afraid I didn't read those articles, so I don't know the answer. But I think that you can look up those articles on our website and you can read them. I think freelancers, we sometimes use freelancers ourselves when we're too busy, although we try to limit that because the idea really is for us to grow and to employ people when we need more. But the freelancers that we work with tend to charge approximately €80 an hour. That's approximately the amount that we're willing to pay. I know there are some that are more expensive than that, but we can't afford them. Perhaps the pharmaceutical companies can. And there's some who are cheaper than that. I think the lowest price I've seen is €60 an hour, and the highest is about 100, but the average is about 80. And then in terms of salary in a pharmaceutical or in a company, I think it depends entirely on which country you're in, even which town within the country. I mean, in Switzerland, I know there are people earning totally crazy salaries, like 120,000 euros a year. But I know, in my company, that's definitely not the case. A new medical writer in my company will probably earn about 40,000 euros a year. That's a gross salary, and or maybe slightly less than that, even 38,000. And the most experienced ones, who have up to 8 years experience, I'm not quite sure, but I think it's something like 56,000. But we're not the richest company. If you work for a pharmaceutical company in France, you might manage to earn 70,000 if you weren't a very experienced writer. But I think it depends entirely which country you live in and how experienced you are.
Okay, I'd just like to add, though, before you answer the next question, a short question from Laura. We then have some questions pretty similar about experience and if it's possible to be a medical writer. I'll regroup them, but you will be able to put questions on Twitter, and which we can answer after this webinar. So don't worry, you still have the possibility to answer questions. So Helen, I just sent you that question from Laura. Do you see it? Are unpaid medical writing tests acceptable in your opinion?
I don't see it, but since you've just said it, hold on, I'm just trying to find it. Oh yes, okay. Yes. I've never heard of anyone being paid to do a medical writing test. I believe all medical writing tests are unpaid because they're not pieces of medical writing that are going to be provided to clients. So our test, for example, is a 3-hour test that applicants receive by email, and it contains some data tables from a clinical study report, and we ask the participants to write a few sentences under each table describing the data, and then to write a sort of summary conclusion trying to interpret a little bit what the data mean and what that means for the product. This is the same test. This test is given to every single participant. It's an identical test. And I compare the way each person does it, and I compare their English language skills, their medical interpretation skills, general writing style, etc. So, you know, this is not something that is going to be sent to a client. It's a test that I invented, and that every single applicant who's ever worked for Synopsys has, or who's ever applied to Synopsys has done. So, you know, it would be crazy for me to be expected to pay. I do realise that there are some tests that are very long and can take maybe 2 or 3 days full-time work, and one could ask oneself, is this actually going to be given to a client? But I would be really shocked to imagine that a company would use something written by a job applicant and send it to a client. I mean, in that case, honestly, I hope you don't get the job, because you really don't want to work for a company like that. That's all I can say. It might be slightly different in the field of translation. Perhaps people could be using tests as a way to actually get some free translations done, and I could imagine that that could be annoying. But in the field of medical writing, I really don't believe for a minute that people are using the tests to actually supply clients with documents. So my answer is yes, it's acceptable not to be paid to do a medical writing test.
Okay, Helen.
Okay, there's another question here. It says, hello, I have a
Just 1 minute, Helen.
Oh, sorry.
Sorry. So there are 3 people
Yeah?
who are basically asking, do they have a chance in medical writing? What, you know, kind of what qualifications were needed?
Yeah.
Apart from the EMWA certification, so the one I just sent you, the person has a biochemistry degree and 10 years experience in pharmacology. There's another person who has biochemistry and translation studies, and a third person who is a nurse. So basically, all these people are asking, you know, what, you know, would they need to become a medical writer? You know, do they have a chance?
Okay. Well, I see the one from IMA who says he has a BSc in biochemistry and molecular biology, and has worked in the pharmaceutical industry for 10 years, mainly in pharmacovigilance. So yes, definitely. I think that the sideways move from pharmacovigilance to medical writing is highly feasible. And I would be very interested in seeing your CV because we are being requested more and more now to write documents such as PSURs and DSURs, and we don't really know how to write them. So someone with experience in pharmacovigilance would be of great interest. So I think for IMA the answer is yes. The other 2, I don't see them.
What about sorry, I can if you want. What about a nurse with a scientific background?
Has the nurse actually worked in clinical research? I think a nurse with a scientific background, it's difficult to answer. I'd need to know more about your writing experience, because the person in pharmacovigilance in the pharmaceutical industry, it's sure that he's been doing plenty of writing. But a nurse, the chances, I imagine, are that you've been more practical and less writing. So I'd be interested to see your writing experience and your writing skills. But it certainly does count as a scientific background for sure, yes. And what about the third person?
The third person is a biochemist with a BS in translation studies.
So I would say that's not qualified enough, and it's good to do an MSc or a PhD. I think the problem is nowadays the competition is high. More and more people have heard about medical writing and want to be. So for me, a BSc isn't enough anymore.
Okay, the nurse has just said she also has, I assume it's a woman, has a BA in English.
Okay, so that's interesting, yeah, because that shows writing, yeah.
Okay.
But I think that, you know, it would be a little bit like the BSc, and we might be looking for a higher qualification, or perhaps if the nurse has experience in clinical research, then that would be of great interest.
Okay, then just this one last question, and I think we'll wrap it up, if you agree, Helen.
Mm-hmm.
So this person is a non-native speaker, and they want to know if there's any courses for learning to write really well in English.
That's a good question. So not really in medical writing in particular, but just writing. I think you would need to look within your own country or to look on the internet to see if you could find something. I mean, it would be a really good idea. I don't personally know of any courses, but I'm quite sure there are. And I definitely feel strongly that if someone is non-native English, and I'm employing people to write in English, I need real proof that they're going to be able to write in English that for me is virtually equivalent to a native speaker. So if you've made the effort to do a course and, you know, to get qualifications in that, then that's of great interest and certainly increases your chances a great deal. So I would highly recommend you to look for a course like that, but I'm afraid I don't actually know of any.
Okay, thank you very much, Helen. Thank you for all your advice and your presentation. I'd just like to let everyone know that this webinar has been recorded and it will be available on the EMWA webinar website. Also, if you have any further questions, as I think I said earlier, you can send those questions on Twitter to #EMWA webinar. And after this webinar you will receive a feedback survey on this event, and if you could send any feedback you have for us, that will help us improve the service we are offering. So on behalf of EMWA, thank you for joining us, and we hope we found it very interesting, and you'll participate in some future webinars. Okay.
Yes, thank you very much to everybody for attending, and I hope that I didn't make you feel too pessimistic or worried about the chances of finding a job. Of course it is difficult, it's a challenge, but I really encourage you, and I really hope and pray that you will find a job in medical writing. Good luck.
Okay, thank you everyone. Thank you, Helen. Bye-bye.
Bye.